You know, when we first started thinking about this summit and what we were going to do, we wanted to do something that was impactful. We wanted to do something that would help leaders. And there is no secret that we are in really uncertain times. A lot of change has taken place, but there's also been a lot of talk around culture and quiet quitting and the great resignation and how culture ties to that. We really wanted to pair those two together to figure out how we can address culture while still addressing the fact that this is an uncertain time. And that's what this panel is going to discuss. That's what we're going to tackle. And we have some amazing panelists. And I'm going to let them introduce themselves. But I will say we have Teri Green-Manson, Tia Hopkins, Courtney Jackson, and Juliet Okafor. Thank you guys for joining. And if you guys could go on camera, if you're already on camera, let's start off with you, Teri, and introduce yourself.
Hi, I'm Teri Green-Manson. I break everything, fix nothing. Been in technology for about 17 years. Combination of 6 degrees, yet still not enough, right? I have a federal cybersecurity contracting firm, which I headed up probably about 2 years ago. And I just recently quit my job as somebody else's CIO to take my company a little bit more serious.
Thank you, Teri. Jules?
Hi, can you hear me?
Yes, ma'am.
Great. So I am the CEO and founder of Revolution Cyber. Revolution Cyber has been around since 2019. I am also an attorney, but my background is that I've been called a marketing maven and been in sales for over 20 years. Basically, I enjoy bringing the intersection of marketing, sales, and influence into the sphere of security and helping CISOs and security leaders communicate better with stakeholders, understand better the business challenges, and communicate the value of security across an organization.
Thank you, Jules. Tia.
All right. Tia Hopkins. I'm the Chief Technology Officer and Chief Cyber Risk Strategist at eSentire. I've been in IT security for over 20 years. I'm a professor in a Master's of Cybersecurity program, football coach. My passion, though, is I'm a bit of a tinkerer. So I like turning chaos into order and solving difficult problems with technology, but building process around that technology. I think that's a bit of a gap in the industry, relying on technology alone. So in my role with eSentire, I'm responsible for making sure the products and services that we are taking to market are actually delivering meaningful security outcomes.
Thank you, Tia. I have to ask, you said football, and this is an international audience. The ball you kick or the ball you throw?
The ball you throw.
All right, thank you. And Courtney.
Yes, thank you, Jerich. Hello, everyone. My name is Courtney H. Jackson. I'm the founder, CEO of Paragon Cyber Solutions based in sunny Tampa, Florida. We specialize in security and compliance assessments, audit preparation, and developing corporate security programs for the government and commercial clients. A little about me personally, I've been in this field over 20 years before it came cool, to include some time spent, active duty military right out of high school, and then primarily as a federal government contractor before I took the leap into entrepreneurship. I have my master's in information security insurance, several industry certifications, and as I mentioned, a lot of years of hands-on experience. So it's happy to be here, looking forward to our discussion.
I am so looking forward to the discussion. I don't think we've had this many chiefs on at any point in time. So this is exciting to have this conversation. So let's just jump right in. We're talking about healthy cultures. The word culture means something different to different people, and it definitely means something different at different times. Maybe each of you can share what you guys think of and what culture actually means to you. We'll start with Teri.
Jared, I'm starting to feel picked on. So the truth of the matter is, I think you brought up a great topic. The definition of culture in an organization is really, really palatable. And when you have diversification that exists, this with a huge deficit come to play. So one thing I try to do is find an equal standard ground where we all coexist. And to be honest, that's emotions. All humans have emotions, and all humans actually acquire connection. I currently do yoga and meditate with my team, which bolster my production by 65%, but that was actually our commonality rule. And it was hard to see a technology department do it, but now it's actually it's accelerated throughout the entire organization. Now everybody is trying to adapt the methodology.
All right, let's go in a different order so nobody feels picked on. Courtney, how about you go second?
All right. Yeah, I agree with everything Teri said. And for me, culture is all about the people. To me, I look at it outside of the work, what we do day to day, but the people actually performing it and their health and their mental state. And then just the company, like, what are we known for? Why do people want to work for us? You know, those are the types of things I think about when I think of culture.
Tia.
I think for me, obviously, I agree with everything Courtney and Teri shared, but also it really is the beliefs and behaviors, both internally and externally, that are, I guess, followed or promoted by the organization. I think that drive the way employees interact with managers, so internally, but also drive the way companies interact in business transaction, and whether that's with consumers or with other businesses. And to Courtney's point around people, there's people all through that. And so what you want, you mentioned a healthy culture within that. There's cultures that aren't great, right? So a healthy culture is one that through those interactions, employees feel great, consumers feel great, great feelings exist between business relationships. So that's what it means for me. And obviously there's a lot that goes into that. Teri mentioned diversity and things like that. So there are a lot of various elements that promote what that feels like within a specific environment. But on the surface, that's what it means to me.
Jules, what about you?
Yeah, no, I work in culture every day, and literally culture is the thing that you feel when you walk into a room in an organization, regardless of what the marketing says and regardless of what they're telling you in the interview. The culture is the reality of the situation in which the organization sits, and typically the gap between what they say they do and what really happens when no one's watching. And so we always think about this idea of building a culture. Cultures already exist. The question is if the culture is already toxic or if it's something that provides positive vibes and positive value. So I like to talk about culture, about what it is that people talk about in Slack in the DMs versus what they're talking about in the general channel. The true culture is what people are talking about in the DMs and what they're talking about offline.
That's a really good example. And I like that you kind of said the culture exists. Some people say, well, we don't have a culture here. Culture is like the air you breathe. It's there.
Yes.
Now, is it good or is it bad? Right. And that is about what you do. And another thing I usually tell people is culture is a combination of what you tolerate and what you celebrate. And somewhere in between there is effectively how you're leading your people. And to that point, I like that we're using the word healthy because it implies intentionality, right? Nothing and nobody is healthy without taking deliberate steps. You have to eat right. You have to work out. You have to not walk in front of moving cars. Like you have to do things to stay healthy and to keep everything intact. Go ahead.
I would disagree. And here's why. So culture is also contextually where it sits. So the way America defines healthy isn't the way Nigeria defines healthy. And I know that because I'm both, right? So when I think about culture in Nigeria, we talk about a patriarchal culture in America, we talk about a patriarchal culture in Nigeria, except the impact on women in Nigeria of the patriarchy is much harsher than it is in America. And so therefore, when I, Juliet, take myself within an American culture and go to Nigeria, it feels toxic there. But were I born there, it'd be quite healthy. So I always ask people to think about culture in the context of personally, what culture looks like as healthy for you, and then measuring yourself against that culture everywhere you go. And then you get to determine what is healthy and what is not. I say the same thing about, if you think about scales, and culture is also on a scale. A scale can be wrong, but it's only wrong if you use if it can be right if you use the same scale to measure yourself. So I am always having organizations set a baseline for their culture. What is it that you want to be, and where is it that you are now? And then you don't compare yourself to your peers, you compare yourself to yourself, and you're constantly trying to optimize your culture, whatever you as a group define that as being.
Yeah, that's a really great point, and
Mhm.
bringing the international aspect to it, because we do have an international audience. Culture is going to look different in different locations.
Yeah.
And to that point, you have to really be deliberate around
Yes.
what steps you take to build the culture. And I'm curious if you guys can share some examples of some steps you've taken to be deliberate about building culture in your organizations. We'll start with Courtney this time.
Sure.
No. So, as a small business owner, I went into it with, what I experienced at other organizations, right? So I considered that, but then more importantly, everyone that's joined us, I asked for their feedback coming in the door. What did you like and dislike about previous employers? And we really listened to that and put those things in place within our company. So that's one thing I like about being able to truly create the culture, based on actual feedback from the team versus me saying, oh, I like this, so this is how I'm going to do it, or I didn't like this. So, it's not about me, it's about the team collectively. So I make sure that everyone comes in, has a voice, and that we actually listen to their feedback and, implement it.
So besides asking for their feedback when they first come in, do you have a more of a constant feedback loop as well?
We
Or is it
do.
just come to me whenever you want to come to me?
So both, right? We have regular meetings, team meetings, as well as team building, so team outings and things. But then I have an open door policy as well. So I've had team members come to me directly, even though they have another supervisor. And I'm military. I know it's a chain of command, but being a CEO, I still want the team to know, hey, if you have concerns, you can still come to me. And some of them have executed that.
I like that. People should know when they can and when they don't need to keep the chain of command.
Exactly.
Yes. Yeah.
Jules, what about you?
Uh,
What deliberate steps have you taken?
So there are a few ways. I'm always looking for real indicators of our culture where it's someone's not just telling me what I want to hear. And I think it's because of my sales background. Legitimately, I could tell when a customer really liked what I was saying because I'll measure how much in a conversation they're talking versus how much I'm talking. And I always go for 70-30, the customer talking more than I'm talking. That's a real indication of whether they're really engaged, right? So you're measuring engagement. But in my company, and I just traveled today to San Francisco to meet one of our new employees, I try deliberately always to share my vulnerabilities and my weaknesses. And it's because I want people to know that I expect them to have them and I expect them to be aware of them and willing to share that part of themselves. And so I always start with myself and say, how do I model the things I want my employees to see? Because I can say it all day long, but if I'm not showing it, they're going to your point, what's celebrated, right? Versus what it is that we're communicating is important. So I want people in our organization to feel like we can be vulnerable with each other because as a growing startup, we're going to have so many low times and so many times when we feel like, we've got our backs against the wall, we've got to keep pushing. We've got to feel like we can trust people. And I feel like the most times I've been able to trust people in my lives, it's been at our weakest points and when we felt like we were in it together. So I'm always measuring whether people feel like they can get things wrong, whether they feel like they can take feedback and they're giving feedback in ways that are respectful. And then also, I'm always looking to see if they feel like they can talk to each other and they don't feel like they need to compete for my attention. Those are the subtle cues I feel like you can tell truly where the culture is if you can consistently measure those things and scale them.
That is so good. And I don't know if you were on for some of the previous talks. You brought up psychological safety, you brought up vulnerability, you brought up trust. These are all things that are being discussed on all the previous speakers. And it just happened so perfectly that it's happening succinctly in the way that it's happening. I love your response. Teri, you're not first this time.
Okay, Jerich. So I actually take a different stance. I think it's really important to understand the generational aspects, right? So I like to analyze those trends. I'm a millennial. When you look at Generation X and Generation Z, they all have different barriers that they actually aspire to do. And based on those aspirations, I actually try to kind of create opportunity where they can communicate on a different level. For instance, I had an elder person was like, this person just don't know what they're doing. It wasn't that they didn't know what they were doing. They were so out of the box and so innovative, the older person couldn't adapt to it. Instead of being able to embrace change, they found a way to resist it. So it was my job to come in from a collaboration perspective to say, let's be able to highlight the values in the generation versus ostrate them, push them to the side. We can't do that, right? So I try to take it from that stance, and from there, I do the same thing as far as the other lady said, take out a standard survey. I do it for internal and external basis because we have different generations on both sides.
I love the nod towards generational diversity. It's one of those things that it's here. You don't create it. General diversity, it's here. It is what it is. 50% of our population are millennials. Baby boomers are slowly on the way out the door, and Gen Zers are knocking, right? And Gen X is constantly forgotten, which is why they're called the forgotten generation, or the silent generation. But I think that's spot on. I also think that each generation has negative connotations applied to them, and it's necessary that we break some of those stereotypes. I usually say that, millennials are they call us the participation trophy generation. I say, well, yeah, Gen Xers and baby boomers gave us those participation trophies. We didn't give them to ourselves, right? We are the results of previous generations. And the more people are aware of those things, the more likely we are to break some of those perceptions. Tia, what about you?
So I think for me, when building a culture, it's important to be human and relatable. Because not even just within the corporation, within this industry, cybersecurity, trust is huge. And people have to feel like you understand them. And the more more open they are to you, the more you're able to help and make adjustments. So I'm Team Jules all the way with the more the customer, or in this particular conversation, my reports are communicating with me, then the better I know I'm doing. And that's really important to me. But I think unique to Jules and Courtney and Teri, because they're all running their own thing, I actually have two cultures that I have to maintain. So there's the corporate culture at Eastern Tire that, one, I have to make sure that I buy into in a way that I can fully represent as a leader, but my team also is a subculture of that culture, because my team is going to have different needs. My team needs to have its own brand. And so within that, we have a culture, but that culture, one, it has to be inclusive. It has to be, where everyone feels like they belong, no matter, their level of experience or background or age, all those things. They have to feel like they have the ability to be innovative and bring forward ideas and fail fast. But that culture also has to align with, the corporate culture. There's that balance between giving my team so many liberties within the subculture that it impacts the way the team overall is perceived within the broader culture of the company. So I pay attention to that a lot as well.
I appreciate you bringing up subculture, Tia. All of you others, Teri, Courtney, Jules, you're running your own organizations. So the culture is what you said, and you can make sure that no subcultures exist if you want to. But for the person that's out there that said, hey, I'm not the CEO, I'm not completely running the show, I want to build a culture, but what I want to build may not necessarily align with the patterns and the culture that exists in the greater organization. I imagine you guys experience that. Part of the reason probably why you want to have your own organization so you can do it your own way. But what suggestions would you give to people that recognize that they want to take some of these things that you guys are saying and apply it, but their larger organization doesn't necessarily align with these cultural values?
I'll take it. So
yes, please.
That is the work that my company does. So in entering security in 2015, I started on the sales side, and every time I would go into a security operations center, what the SOC was saying to me and willing to share with me was not what they were saying to their leader. Unfortunately, they felt overwhelmed with the technology. There were too many alerts. They felt, like they weren't being respected with regard to, the job that they thought they were taking wasn't what they were actually delivering. And so what I recognized quite quickly is that the way in which we talk even in security, there's this kind of bravado, and there's this overwhelming need for people to say the things that people want to hear. And then we're always very quick to spread bad habits. If you're going to be joining a team, or you are the leader of a team, or you work with a team and your job is actually to effectuate their capability into the organization, you have a responsibility to listen first and talk second. People tell you what you want to hear. The question is, are you willing to listen to it? That's the first thing I always say. When I go in now into organizations on a contract, I actually have to sit in the organization to provide security culture as a service. So I have to go around, talk to various people. I both find the commonalities between what that team that brought me in is saying they want to do and the things that the larger organization says is important to them, constantly finding ways that they can come together and collaborate around those things. So how does security looking to ensure that when people leave the company, they aren't taking credentials, they are locked out of systems, they don't have access to anything that they shouldn't have? Well, that's an HR question as well. And HR has a fundamental interest in making sure that they create a complete experience from onboarding to offboarding. So you essentially could say security would be providing value by working with HR to make sure the onboard, making sure people get credentials, throughout someone's working within an organization that they are aligning at each milestone with what security controls they should have. And then when they're offboarded, that they actually no longer have credentials. They had a good experience as an exit interview, and we understand what the relationship will be to the company moving forward. Sometimes they move into contractor roles and still need access. But we have to, when we go into an organization, I don't even like to say teams, and I'll say, and that's a different discussion, but when we have the different roles and groups that are coming together for specific purposes, and as CISOs or leaders or even mid-level managers, we always have a fundamental ability to influence. And that's all it is influence. You may not have an ability or an authority to change everything, but the thing you can control, measure it. And then what you want to make sure is that you're not out on a limb and you're not just doing something because it makes you feel good, but there's an actual tangible value people can point to where security is better because of what it's doing, but it's actually helping the broader spectrum of the organization. And I say that all the time. And what I call those are quick wins. Identify the places in the organization, especially where they could mostly very quickly benefit from what you offer, and tie the two together and keep talking. And that's the first step. It's very complicated, but that's the first step.
That is so good. That's a long first step, but I did not realize we had a culture whisperer, and culture as a service is an offering. You may have coined a term. You might want to hashtag that before someone else takes it.
Seriously, I'm thinking, oh, like, that's interesting.
Yeah. Does anybody else want to jump in on this one? Or
I had a thing I wanted to add. Obviously, not running my own thing, not tips for how to go off and do it yourself, but I think there is something to be said about culture if you're in an environment where you don't feel like you have that influence that Jules mentioned. Because if you're telling your team to come to you and you're the bearer of whatever it needs, like you're the remover of roadblocks and you're the institutor of change on their behalf, but when you go upstream, you're blocked. I mean, that damages your credibility with your team. It can't feel good to you in terms of the culture that you're a part of. So I know myself as a leader, sometimes I just get stuck in, I just need to do what my team needs me to do. I need to make sure they have what they need. I'm an enabler. I like to see everyone be successful. But if you find yourself banging your head against the wall over and over and over again, that says something about the culture that you exist in, even though you're serving as a, kind of a blocker between the business and your team so they don't experience it. You are, in a sense, building your own subculture to shield your team from the business when they do really need to be exposed to the reality a bit. So I encourage leaders to really think about that. Like, are you a pathway to leadership, or are you the person that's insulating your team from what the true culture is within your organization?
And Tia, you are so right. And a lot of times we talk about these very aspirational conversations about how great culture is, and you can just rally and get things done. It doesn't happen like that, especially in big organizations. But I think of culture as 1 in the inches, right? I think even in the Slack, you can, there are conversations about these long-term programs that culture requires. It takes time. But what I think your primary job as a leader, even if you have just one of the teams or one of the groups that the organization has, is to provide cover. First, psychological safety. Psychological safety isn't just telling them, no one will harm you, you're safe with me. It's also being honest about what you can actually accomplish after you've tried and tried and tried. Hey, we need to set smaller goals. We're not going to be able to get this done this year. and constantly figuring out how to be agile and redirecting and remessaging back to your team. I struggled with that. And I'll tell you, I struggled. I had a huge sales team and we had these huge goals. The leadership can understand why we felt like we couldn't reach those goals. And in my mind, it was the culture, but how do you explain that? And your team is looking at you like, okay, we're not going to get our commissions, we're not going to get our bonuses this season. But it's like, what I had to do is say to myself, what can I get them, right? What do I feel like today that they deserve? And then how do I make it so that I can give my boss something that will allow us to have even a longer conversation? And sometimes it's just continuous conversations with no results. That's just the truth of it.
It is. And before we segue to the next question, I'll just kind of say this. Culture does not get developed in a day, and it does not change in a day. And it is a game of inches, as you put it. And it's up to you early on to recognize if the culture isn't where you want it to be and make that be something that you're communicating. The same way we communicate all of the hard metrics, you can communicate some of those soft things as well. If we don't start to have change of behavior, if we don't start to see people care about things and not just do things because they have to do them, we're not necessarily going to progress like we want to progress. So this whole thing is about uncertainty, and right? And when we thought about this, we were thinking about the pandemic. And then there was a war in Ukraine, potential recession for people in certain countries, the queen passing away, right? There are so many things and so much change taking place. And we just talked about how to create culture. But what steps do you guys take to sustain and maintain culture during some of these hard times?
Mine was the meditation, believe it or not, and the mindfulness. I think we didn't pay attention to how much we was actually putting on technology teams. So all of a sudden, there in a lot of companies, like I've worked at companies like IBM, TransUnion, a lot of big companies. And the truth of the matter is, when they always think about you putting the next thing in front of you, the next thing in front of you. And they didn't realize they were actually stacking it up on technology. People, they're the last of their concerns, yet the world was looking to technology to be able to kind of help facilitate everything they needed to do. Tech teams were at a height of anxiety, right? And then you already have a lot of technology people, depending on what their skill set is, they're not that friendly. Well, they're not that personable. So you're dealing with these introvert personalities all of a sudden and their high anxiety. So we started to meditate, and that's how we was able to bolster it, but at the same time, de-escalate them and show them that you care not only about their mental state and their financial wealth, but you actually cared about how great they did as an individual.
I like that. Courtney, what about you?
I would say being consistent, right? I think when things happen, that's different from being agile now. Sometimes we have to pivot and make some change. But when I say consistency, when those things happen, when those bad things happen as a leader, people are looking at you, and you have to be consistent in that culture that you're working on, that you're building, even through those times. People are going to lean on you and they're going to look to you to, get through it. And I think another thing is actually taking action. A lot of people say a lot of great things, but are they doing it? That's two different things too. So I think just still maintaining that consistency and being a leader throughout, even though it may be hard, I think that's important when you're in that role.
I agree. People are going to look to their leader. If their leader is calm, if their leader is chill, then they know they can be as well.
Leader panicking and they like, whoa, wait a minute. We don't want that,
Absolutely. There's a quote I say about CISOs. I say CISOs are like tea bags. You never know what's in them until they're in hot water. I think that kind of applies to CEOs and leaders as well. And people need to know that their leader is going to be steady even when times aren't. What about you, Tia?
I think for me, it's, one, I would hope that most leaders had the type of relationship with their teams where they would look to them in these hard times, because I do think some leaders do struggle to establish that level of rapport. But assuming that the leader does have that, and of course I did with my team, I made a hard pivot to the human element. As leaders, we toe that line between leading teams and driving business outcomes, and we have to make the two come together. So a lot of times those conversations are about career, they're about targets, they're about corporate goals. And so when something very humanizing happens, you have to become human to reach your team. And so while you are still that strong leader, like I'm here if you need anything, if you need any questions answered, that's important. But back to that, the vulnerability aspect of it, that Jules was talking about, like make it real. This is not something we just sweep under the rug and keep moving. This is something that we are acknowledging is heavily impacting our business, is impacting our personal lives, it's impacting the entire world. So, we can't pretend that this is something that if we just kind of press forward for the next quarter, things will get better. Like if you're talking about sales targets, like these are real issues, and it does take some type of change away from, the status quo of what the normal leadership looks like to get the level of response from the team. I think that's required in situations like that.
I love that. You kind of just said, be a good human, right? Like you have the job as a leader, but in the end of the day, these are human connections and human interactions. And culture is about what the people do, not what the technology is doing, not what anything else is happening. It's about people. So put people first.
Yep.
I like it. Jules.
I'll say that one of the things the pandemic did, I think it shifted what we as a nation and as, citizens thought of any company, any country thought was important. I think most people decided that the, high intensity, high paying, high performance jobs just weren't worth it anymore, right? Because, I could have died and then I wouldn't have lived my life. And so what I did during that time was I really had one-on-one conversations. I think to all the comments made, I went, from person to person to person. And really, some people were sick. I started visiting families and tried to understand what it changed for them and what was now important so that I could then realign them with what they wanted to do, what they thought made sense. And some people decided it was time to leave, right? Because the company still has its goals. We can't really stop. We can slow down, but it may not be that we may not be aligned anymore. And so the best bet may be that you take some time off or that you go and do something else, you come back. Two of the women on our team, really, really, really great team members, came to me and just said, it's too much. My kids are in school. My husband is, he's going to work. He's first responder. I'm home. I can't do this anymore. And what I did is for each of them in separate times, I just gave them a week off. I said, hey, because these are your top performers. Like, it doesn't matter what it costs you, really. You want them to, if you can save that relationship, you want to do what you can to save it. Gave them a week off paid. Take the time. Don't check in. They both came back and they said, thank you. They had never had a boss tell them to take the time off. Think about how simple that was. You're stressed, your husband's unhappy, take the time off and don't talk to us. I saved myself from having to rehire two really good people who had been with us for years. I mean, it really is simple. Just when things are really hectic, I find the answer in stillness, and I just assume everybody else will benefit from that too.
I love that you just went straight to your team and said, hey, do what you need to do so that you can come back so you can do what you need to do.
Yes.
Right. I think that makes a lot of sense. I would add one more thing. There are times when you need to do the same and they need to see you do that. And when they see you do that, they feel empowered to do the same. So kind of lead by example.
Agree.
So it's not common to end a panel on a negative note. But we've been so focused on the positive actions that you can take to build a culture. I'd like to talk about some things that could kill a culture. What are some culture killers, right? The things that could really result in the digression of a culture's health. I'd love to hear some thoughts from you guys on that. Let's go with Teri again.
I'll start. Your arrogance, to be honest. You can be so arrogant sometimes. I feel like people get these titles and they go to their head. If your team feel like they cannot converse to you, how many times have people shied away from speaking to their manager because they feel like there's no commonalities there? They don't even look at you like you're a regular human being. And I believe your attitude, like you said, lead by example. So they're actually looking towards you for guidance, and if they don't feel like you can guide them, what are you doing here? And we also find ourselves in those positions as well. What I try to do and personally is, I don't care if you own your own company, if you're a CEO at a big company, everybody has a boss. The CEO reports to the board. Okay. So you still have to actually be mindful on the things you do and make sure even when you're talking to your culture, you don't bring the negative tone with it. So you have to be really mindful and intentional in the way you actually grasp and spit things out towards them.
Yeah, arrogance. Nobody likes an ass. You're just gonna tell people that being an ass is okay, right? So I agree with you there. Courtney, what about you?
Like culture killers, I would say overcommitment.
Mm,
Right? Like that's a pet peeve of mine. I mentioned earlier about kind of doing what you say you're going to do. And if people are looking at you, right, and you're like, okay, yeah, I'm going to do this, 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 and those things don't happen, that's over commitment and under delivery. To me, is just a straight up culture killer.
I never thought about that. People could really feel as if they are not succeeding at what they're doing because there's too much on their plate to do, and no
Yeah,
one's acknowledging that it's too much.
yeah. I
Yeah,
think
that could
everybody should
definitely bring
take the
them around.
time to assess that. And even yourself, not just deadlines, but even just yourself committing to things, even if you're just trying to make a good impression, like, okay, yeah, I'll do that. I'll do that. Sign me up for this. Sign me up for that. It's great to take the initiative, but if you can't deliver on it, then it's bad. And that's negative. So I think that's definitely a culture killer.
So as a leader, if you've given too much to somebody, how would you suggest they come to you to say, this is too much?
I encourage open communication. I know it's not like that everywhere. So far, that's worked really well. And I think there's a misconception that people have that asking for help is a weakness or
Mm,
admitting that you can't do something is a weakness. I think there's strength in that because there's a lot of people, to Teri's point, the arrogance. I can do this, I can do everything. We can't do everything. Everybody needs help with something. So I think just fostering that open communication, like, hey, you know what? I know I said, we were in a groove and I'll do these 4 things, but I can definitely do these 2 and I'll try to do these other 2 things. I would much rather a conversation like that and open that type of communication versus someone just saying, I'll do everything and just completely dropping the ball. So I try to keep the doors open in that regard.
all right. What about you, Jules?
Um, I would say 2 things. So one is I always hated the companies where they gave the perception that the group was making a decision, but the real decisions were made behind closed doors that most people didn't go behind. And that's a culture killer because people then are really clear that no matter what they say, that's not what's going to happen. And people then they quiet quit, right? They just recede from participating. And if you don't have an active participatory employment or team and employees, over a while, it will impact the way you deliver services and the way your customers start to see you. It does have this overflowing effect. So where there are places where too many closed doors physically, and now with Slack, where there are open channels, but the real decisions are made in the quiet executive channels for real, and people know that, that's a culture killer. I think also it's this high performers culture where we reward the arrogant jerk. And then we act like everybody has to be high performing and everyone needs to be a leader. But really, you can't be a leader if there are no followers. So if we disrespect people because they're not at the top of the chain, there is no organization, and there is no organization truly flat. So what we have to do is we have to dole out responsibility and respect, because people are still giving up their lives 8 hours, 10 hours, 12 hours a day for you. They deserve some measure of respect, even if they're not the high performers. Because high performers tend to do it to save the day, and many of them create problems in order to save the day. But the consistent ones, we don't notice because they don't make noise, but they still need to be respected and recognized.
Agree with everything you just said, and I think we say that we have a record a number of times that the word jerk has been said on a SAN summit. Um, we had a whole session on jerks, but I agree. And to be quite honest, we've all worked with that brilliant jerk that was really good, but their behavior was indicated that they know they're that good, so they can do whatever they want to do, however they want to do it. So yeah, I can appreciate that. And that goes back to what you celebrate and what you tolerate. I'm not going to celebrate that jerk, and I'm not going to tolerate that jerk, and I don't want other people to think I do, or we're going to create more of them. So I love that. What about you, Tia?
Yeah, I think everything that's been said, about good culture, means we all believe in cultures that foster environments of inclusiveness and belonging, and being relatable and human and vulnerable. So I think killers to that are all rooted in everything that's been said here, and I'll also add in lack of transparency. And lack of transparency can manifest itself in a number of different ways, whether it's poor communication. Maybe the leadership team doesn't mean to create the appearance that they're not keeping everyone in the know, but they're just poorly communicating. And so there's a lot of chatter going on in the background about, well, are they taking this seriously? Do I really matter, et cetera? I think other killers with that include not taking action on feedback or not addressing feedback, because then it makes it feel like the suggestion box is really a box with a hole in the bottom over a trash can that no one's ever going to get to, right? So all those things, I think that can cause a negative perception of the true transparency of an organization is a culture killer, because it results in exactly what Jules said. If I feel like no one's listening to me, eventually I'm going to stop speaking. And if I don't really feel connected to the business, and I don't really feel like all the work that I'm doing is truly having an impact, well, I'm not going to work as hard. And then eventually that trickles down into the service that's delivered or the product that's delivered. And then that trickles to the external culture in the way of the experience to the consumer or the business partner, et cetera. So, I mean, for me, transparency is a big factor in a healthy culture, and anything that goes against that can be a culture killer.
What I love most about all of your answers is everything that you guys stated, the leader has a lot of control over. It's oftentimes that the leader kind of got, I can't help it, they're doing what they're doing, and so forth, right? But the reality is it's about what happens from the top down. I would add one more that's unconventional, and I'd say too much of a good thing. I've seen companies with 20 core values. If you have 20 core values, none of them are core, right? You just took a bunch of stuff that you saw somewhere, threw it on a board, and said, this sounds good. You guys have to be going after some type of North Star. There has to be 3, 4, 5 things that just matter the most to you, and you'll make decisions on those things over anything else. And that's the culture. Amazon, a lot of places that are known to have strong cultures, they have those. All right, we're going to wrap this thing up. Each of you guys have a minute to kind of give one final last thought, and maybe something actionable for the people that are listening. And we'll start with you, Jules. 1 minute.
One of the things that I'll say is I talk to CISOs all the time, security leaders, even up and coming managers in security. What I want to be clear about is you can't develop a positive culture if you yourself aren't positive. We tend to neglect ourselves in this space. In fact, this industry has some of the highest numbers of divorces, alcoholics, people on drugs, people who are, potentially depressed. And what we've done is, for the mission, right, for the broader mission of securing the world, we've left ourselves out as priorities for being able to take for self-care. But ultimately, a culture, you have the most influence on a culture when you yourself are someone of influence. You can't be a great influence if you yourself are not great. So I really like to talk to especially women and underrepresented groups to really think about how you increase how you see yourself, how you, like you mentioned, Jerich, how you find a North Star. Who are you? What's your core? 3 or 5 of them is fine. But how do you then, as an ambassador, and I call this cyber diplomacy, how do you encourage and enable that among the people around you who you have the direct control, and then have that sort of filter out into anyone you come into contact with? And I think the better you are at doing that, the more you'll see the cultures around you being influenced and more positive.
Thank you, Jules.
Yeah.
Tia.
Short and sweet, but maybe I'll elaborate on it. But a people first culture is the right culture, because without people, there's no need for culture, because what are you governing? And I think a culture that is rooted in transparency, integrity, and authenticity stands the best chance to be successful, because it fosters all the things that we've been talking about here. And employees feel like they belong, they feel like they have a voice, and they're included. And culture like cybersecurity, is not a static thing. You can't just say, here's my culture, I got this feedback, here's who we're going to be, what we're going to do, and we're done. You do have to constantly assess that, because it changes every day. It changes every time someone leaves the company. It changes every time someone joins the company, every time someone has a baby or whatever. So it is something that has to be constantly monitored, and it has to be agile and open and flexible and all those things.
Couldn't agree more. Courtney.
I'll just close out by saying, you know, I want to remind everyone to allow themselves some grace. You know, I think a lot of people really strive for perfection, and especially in a leadership role with all the eyes on you, you know, you feel like you have to nail everything. But, you know, seek out help when you need it. You don't have to do everything yourself. And then it was mentioned as well to, you know, be positive. I think that does translate to your team as well. And just, you know, make yourself and your team a priority.
Thank you, Courtney. And Teri, I went with you first every single time. Now you get to close it out.
Well, the truth of the matter is, just to piggyback off all the ladies kind of said, the gist of the lack of transparency. You have to be transparent, and you also have to lead by example. I always say, like she says, you have to be positive, but you know, we as humans know that's not an everyday thing. Find a ritual that actually matters to make you a better leader. Become a mentee, become a mentor, because it's always dual communication and everybody can grow and elevate. Find ways to kind of better yourself and ultimately to better your team. I introduce myself to myself every morning as a mirror, so I can check myself at the door because I'm flawed, right? You know, being able to kind of figure out that we are human and we do have errors, and be able to figure out how we can craft those will make a better team.
Thank you, Teri. I'll close it out with the root word for culture comes from the Latin word cultus, which actually means care. And a lot of words come from this root word, such as cultivate, and that means to prepare and grow, or culture in biology, which means to put something in conditions suitable for growth. So when we talk about culture, ultimately, it's about caring and helping your people grow. And if you do those things well, you're going to have a successful organization. Thank you, guys. I really appreciate your time. This was an amazing panel and powerful, and I know people are going to be better for it.
Thank you.
Thank you.